Okay.
Three,
Okay.
two, one. Yeah, what?
So we are back. We are back again today. A bit late, later than what we expect, but we made it through. Had a bit of a busy week. Anup is here again with me. Anup, so
Hello,
how are you
everyone.
doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you, man?
I'm also doing quite well. And we read yet again another book. Yeah, we finished it last week, but we just didn't have the time to record it meanwhile. So, uh, yeah, that's why we are here a bit later. But we hope that we can go back to our usual schedule from next week. And for last week, we had read The Hound of Baskerville, a book in the series of Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective, written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And it is one of those, I would say, uh, eminent book or something that you have to read. Everybody knows about it, and in some sense, I would say that this book is something that brings the beauty in reading stuff. It's a typical detective novel, and the way the story progresses is like you're solving a puzzle. The writer gives you the fact, and you're solving the puzzle along with the narrator, who is Dr. Watson. And at the end, Sherlock Holmes reveals everything, and then you just try to compare it with yourself. So it's a typical adventure story, nothing so philosophical like what we have been doing so far, but still, it's a very interesting read. How did you find it, Anup?
Don't worry about the philosophical read. We will do it again next week. So rest assured.
So
It was quite nice. Yeah, sorry.
maybe you can do with your customary summary of the book.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I want to say that this was my first Sherlock Holmes book, right? I've
Okay.
heard the name a lot, and I knew that it was about a detective and another guy.
Mm-mm.
But now, like in the story, I knew what the name of the guy is,
Mm-mm.
Dr. Watt,
Mm-mm.
and it was quite different than what we read, as you mentioned. Yeah, I found it actually really nice. I think I'll look into other Sherlock Holmes book, I guess,
Mm.
because yeah, it was something different, and sometimes something different is also nice, right?
Mm. Maybe you want to give a bit of synopsis of what the
Overview.
story happened with your typical Anup style about the
Sure,
story.
sure, sure.
A spoiler
So
alert
here,
to everybody. Just skip the videos if you don't want spoilers.
yeah, so yeah, let's go into the story. We have Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson having some random conversation, right? So
Mm-mm.
then comes the guy, Dr. Mortimer, I guess,
Mm-mm.
and he explains them what is happening in what was the place again? What was the city again where they were? The
Uh,
Moor, the Moor, or
no.
uh,
Yeah, I think it is some place with D. I forgot the name. Moor is something like a marshland, so
okay,
it's not necessarily the name of the place, but the
yeah.
geography of the place.
Oh, okay, okay. I thought it was like called the Moor. Okay. Anyways, then they go there and there's this one weird case, right? Like, no, they don't go there, but he explains the weird case.
Mm-mm.
It deals with Sir Charles Baskerville, I think that was his
Mm-mm.
name. He's found dead, and Sir Mortimer explains that he found a weird trace of a hound,
Mm-mm.
like 20 feet away from the corpse or something like that. And
Mm-mm.
the corpse also didn't had any marks or any physical injury, right? So
Mm-mm.
the case was kind of mysterious, and yeah, like then he asks whether like Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes they want to take a look in that case.
Mm-mm.
He also says that another guy, like a distant relative of Baskerville, is
Mm-mm.
coming tomorrow because he is the heir of all of the wealth left
Mm-mm.
by Sir Charles Baskerville, right? He
Mm-mm.
also distributes the wealth, but like he holds the major share, I guess, in
Mm-mm.
his will. What was his name again? Like from the other guy,
Henry. Henry
Henry.
Baskerville. Yeah.
Henry Baskerville. And yeah, then Henry Baskerville arrives the
Mm-mm.
next morning, and then they have a talk. And then later on, after Henry Baskerville like arrives, I think they get a letter and in
Mhm.
the letter says like, yeah, stay away from the moor or something like that. If your
Mhm.
life is good to you, I think that was the message, right?
Mhm.
And then like Sherlock Holmes gets interested, I guess,
Mhm.
and then he also knows that they are kind of getting followed, and
Mhm.
yeah, I'll leave some details here. Later on, they go to the place, the D place that I mentioned before,
Mhm.
and Sherlock Holmes says like Dr. Watson should go along with like Henry Baskerville and Dr. Mortimer and spend time with Henry Baskerville, I guess, for his security and see what happens in
Mhm.
the D place.
Mhm.
It's annoying, man. Like I want to know what the D place
Yeah.
is.
Uh,
Anyways, let's get. Maybe we'll figure it on our own, like Sherlock Holmes did.
yeah. Basically, it's just yeah, the Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson to figure out why the murder happened, and then come up with a very reasonable theory,
Mm,
backs it up with facts, and then yeah,
mm.
at the end they catch the bad guy.
No, no, I meant like maybe we will figure out what the D is by the end of this.
uh,
Yeah. Anyways, do you want to elaborate more, or like, do you think this is enough? So the
Yeah, I think it's sufficient because
okay.
the background you have provided very well, and I'm
Mm,
sure anybody who will listen to us will be inspired enough with the premise of the story that we have mentioned so far. But I have to say that I have received multiple comments from some of my friends that they really like Anup's synopsis of the story. So I just
oh,
wanted
thank
to
you.
keep the trend going.
If you like our way and stuff, you can donate a coffee to us.
Yeah.
No, no.
I just wanted to tell you that I read this book twice, right?
Mm,
At first, I just went to the internet. So this book is from the Victorian era, late 1800s. So these are in the public domain. It's
mm,
easily available on the internet. So I just picked the first one available on the internet and was just reading it, 30 pages long. And Sherlock Holmes stories are not that long, and I have read them in
mm,
the past. So I thought, okay, it's a 30 page long story, and I read through it, and it's a very simple story, right? It's so many things missing and so many things skipped over, and I thought, okay, this sounds really weird, but goes through. I read through it all, and then I'm like, okay, not the best
mm.
story, but possibly you have to be satisfied with it. And then we had a call during the last week, and then you say that the book is actually 70 pages long, and so I get the original one now,
Mm,
and then I read it this time, and then yeah, everything starts filling up, and now
mm,
the story is kind of the Sherlock Holmes story that I know. So I got to have the experience twice,
mm,
albeit the first time it was not so good.
mm, mm,
Uh, and that's something about Sherlock Holmes story. I actually have read almost all of them. I
mm,
started with the study in Scarlet, and then I also read The Sign of Four when I was 15, and a friend of mine used to have a short stories collection of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which was all the stories of Sherlock Holmes, volume one, two, three, and I borrowed from him, and then just used to read every story, right?
mm,
And in a sense, I can say the character at least formed the personality that I have because I read it in such an impressionable age
mm,
that I've always tried to apply the methods Sherlock Holmes uses, albeit in some success and some failures, right?
mm,
Uh, but you know, that's something I always try to emulate. And
mm.
Sherlock Holmes, in himself, is a very peculiar character, and I highly recommend that you read other books to get more idea of the character himself.
How many of these guys exist, like of these stories?
I think there are many of them. As far as I know, these were written during the Victorian era, and how these
Mm,
stories would be is back in the day they don't have TVs or internets, right? So they would
mm,
read the paper, and people, the story writers would publish every chapter every week or every Sunday, or something like that, and then
mm,
people would be looking forward to reading it. So every story would be organized in such a way. So should not be a very long read. It's something that you can have after a long day at work. Just pick one chapter, read through it, just relax in your chair, play a soothing music in the background, and just read one chapter, and then just try to picture yourself in the place of Dr. Watson, and then yeah, experience the uh,
Mm.
trip.
And is it always like written in the view of Dr. Watson or
Yeah,
like
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So the premise is such that these stories are actually what are Dr. Watson's stories. So Arthur
Okay.
Conan Doyle has written himself as Dr. Watson, and
Mm.
then these are something Dr. Watson publishes as a regular occasion in probably newspaper or in books or something like that.
Okay.
And I have to tell you that this story does not give so much justice to at least it does justice to it, but I think in a sense you need to have a bit of background about who Sherlock Holmes is.
Mm.
And the reason I recommended this book was I think this is the only book that I have not read from Sherlock Holmes, and it would be
Mm.
unfair for me to recommend something last week that I have already read.
Mm.
But now you have read it, then I would recommend you to read the first book, which is The Study in Scarlet, where
Okay.
everything is kind of built up to understand what happens and how Sherlock Holmes is, how Dr. Watson is, and
Mm.
the characters themselves. So, to give you a bit of background, this will be in the first few pages of the Study in Scarlet. Is Dr. Watson is a retired army veteran. He's a
Mm.
doctor by
Mm.
profession, so he
Mm.
has a bit of the haughtiness of a military person. He's not afraid easily, but
Mm.
also has the empathy of a doctor because he worked as a doctor in the army or something like that.
Mm. Mm.
And Sherlock Holmes is like a private detective. So he does not work with any police enforcement, right? He's a private detective. People hire him for very complicated cases, but he's really well known in the London area, and he's respected by the police of the place, which is the Scotland Yard. And then
Mm.
he solves many different crimes. And
Mm.
personally,
Mm.
he is a bit of an eccentric person, right? He understands every alleyway, he by the sound of it, or he can tell the uh, type of the tobacco by the
Mm.
shape of the
Mm.
ashes, or
Mm. Mm.
the size of the pipe with the pipe holder or stuff like that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
he's kind of like that. And there's a very interesting interaction in the first book where Dr. Watson asks him like, how do you keep all of these things in your brain, right?
Mm.
And Sherlock Holmes says, I mean, your brain is like a room. You can only fit a certain amount of things, and I can fit these kind of things. And
Mm.
interestingly enough, Sherlock Holmes has no idea that Earth revolves around Sun, or he has no
Mm.
idea about mathematics or trigonometry. So he's completely
Mm.
ignorant about those topics. He
Mm.
would be a bum, but for topics related to investigation, mind of the crime,
Mm.
criminal, and
Mm.
deductive skills based on events that happen in the environment, stuff like that.
Mm. Mm.
That is where Sherlock Holmes is the real master, and he kind of figures out complex theories based on
Uh,
his experiences.
mm. Mm. Mm.
He's a bit of a drug addict. He's a bit of a musician. So he's a very eccentric character. Whereas Dr. Watson is a very military person. He's quite disciplined, and
Mm.
oftentimes it forms a very good interaction between the two of them. Where Dr.
Yeah.
Watson is very predictable, and he's very how do I say uh, who prefers to follow the decorum of every
Yeah.
situation, whereas
Mm.
Sherlock Holmes is eccentric and he does not really care about social restrictions,
Mm.
but he recognizes when to use them. So he uses them more as a utility to fit into situations, but not
Mm.
necessarily as something to bind himself by.
Yeah.
So the interaction you see between the two of them and the friendship you see is really interesting.
Mm. Definitely. You said like Holmes is also a drug addict. What do you mean with that?
Yeah, I mean, he would go into heroin dens and then get heroin, use morphine and stuff like that.
Ah, okay. Ah,
Yeah,
so and he also consumes it. Are you saying
sorry?
Sherlock Holmes also consumes
Yeah,
like?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's
Oh,
actually a drug addict. So
Oh.
The more you read, you will recognize that he's actually a drug addict, but his
Mm.
work is not interfered by the drugs that he takes.
Mm. Fishy messages that it sends to
I, w-
children, I guess.
I would say it's not necessarily something like a, yeah, I understand what you mean. When I
Mm.
read it as a 15-year-old,
Mm.
uh, I would read, yeah, and but the it has been written in such a way that you don't really it's not sexy. You know, the drug addiction that is portrayed in the books are how it is, right?
No, 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 no. I know.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. No, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it is debatable, because me as a 15, 16 years old, I don't know how you were at that age, but me at that age, I was like, oh, okay, maybe smoking cigarette is like really cool,
Mm-mm-mm.
stuff like that. And I think if you read this sort of stories, maybe it will kind of enable it, like maybe it will kind of give you some sort of approval that, yeah, it is actually not that big of a deal, right?
Maybe,
So,
maybe, but I never felt so. I also felt smoking would be cool and stuff like that,
mm,
but
mm,
not while reading this book because just the writer just presents how the life is, right? He does not admonish the activity. He
mm,
neither encourages them. So it's just a character quirk of our character, and this is
mm,
used as a plot device in many cases because
mm,
he's a drug addict. He knows a lot of heroin dens and he knows
mm,
all of
mm.
these underground people who are involved in these processes, and I
Mm.
think this is more to make this kind of sense,
Okay.
but not necessarily as something to encourage any reader about
Mm.
it.
Okay. Okay.
That being said, how did you feel the nature of the plot? Because detective stories oftentimes
No,
probably
no,
rely
no.
a lot on
Mm.
an element of surprise, right?
Mm.
An element of
Business, business. I actually want to talk to you about it, but then I
Mhm,
think like I will give away all the surprises to the readers, But there are like two, three scenes that I really liked, like the
mhm.
one scene where Sherlock Holmes actually comes into the story, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that was like, really awesome.
yeah,
And I like Dr. Watson felt like really good. I was
yeah,
like, oh, okay, there is someone who takes the
yeah,
responsibility,
yeah,
and
yeah,
Dr. Watson says the same thing, right?
yeah.
So that was, or he thinks about the same thing,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that was like really nice, I guess.
Maybe we can make it a bit vague. So there's a
Mm,
situation where Dr. Watson is a bit of a bit of a pickle, and
mm,
the story is set up in such a way that Dr. Watson has to do the investigation on his own, and he has kind of figured stuffs out that is a bit darker and then probably
mm,
not as benign as it would look at first glance, and he's really worried about it. But then suddenly there is entry of Sherlock Holmes, and then he feels much more calm, and I think that portrays very well in this story the state of mind of the main character. Sorry,
mm,
of
mm,
Dr. Watson, and I would say the state of mind of all the characters are very well portrayed there. For example, however the characters are explained at the start of the story, that they are consistently behaving in the same way during the whole
mm,
story, and I find as a writing tool, it's really good. And
mm,
there's a saying of there's a saying in some of the books that I have read, at least I heard it comes from the famous Russian writer Anton Chekhov, is that
mm,
the idea of Chekhov's gun is that if a writer introduces a plot point inside the story, then they have to use the plot point, and if they don't use it, then it's just a waste of writing, right?
yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that's something that is very prevalent in these stories, is that these are very tightly neat story, and everything that he explains throughout the build-up of the story kind of
mm,
ties in some way or another into the story as well.
mm, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
one of the side stories, no, were also really nice. I feel the one with his housemaid,
mm-mm.
that was also really nice. Like they also do something in the night, something strange,
Yeah.
and they kind of discover it. It is sort of unrelated to the actual plot, right? But it was like still nice to discover like what they were doing.
Yeah.
Um,
And I also think this is a way from the writer to kind of have more characters there who are like a suspect for us. readers.
Mm.
Otherwise, we would not be as engaged if the mystery did not have multiple possible culprits, right?
Yeah.
And then we are kind of left to wonder, okay, why are they acting this way? Maybe this guy is the murderer, or this guy is the
Yeah.
murderer, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I think it is more in essence to that than That's what I thought. I really
Mm.
enjoyed.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, we,
Did
one of
you actually figure out like who it was? Like just based on all the clues,
No,
or like
not
okay.
not not in this book. I have actually
Mm.
figured out in a previous book, the Study
Mm.
in Scarlet and Sign of Four. Both of them, when I read it, I figured
Mm.
that out. That these guys are
Mm.
in these stories. The Study in Scarlet and Sign of Four, it's a bit more obvious. But in this one, I think it was not so obvious because everybody looked like a possible culprit, right? And
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
one point, you would imagine that I actually thought it was probably like a natural phenomenon that happened, but
Mm. Mm.
you know,
What did you think about the Hound itself, or is it does this already go too much into the puzzle solving?
I mean, I think I thought there was probably a hound, right?
Mm. Mm.
And because the name of the story gives it away,
Mm.
and explains that Charles Baskerville saw the hound once, and then he
Mm.
was really surprised by it, and probably was the cause of his death. At
Yeah.
that point, probably figured I had probably figured out that maybe something to do with heart attack and stuff
Yeah.
related to that. But I didn't imagine how the hound will be in place or how it will be portrayed in the story because
Mm.
at the end of the day, it's a wild beast and it's not like one of your characters which will give away, uh, probably slip up in their preparation. And
Mm.
if in any case you cannot culprit a hound for attacking a person because it's in its nature, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm. Mm.
there
Yeah.
there was something I wanted to ask you. If you read through, I know when you read through it, did you find it very interesting about the way of the subjects and the topics, the science of the time, of the late 1800s when this book is actually set in, the Victorian era? For example, they talk
Science.
about the skull of different kind of people, or the naturalist who is into biology and stuff
Mm.
like
Mm.
that, right? This is
Well,
before
like,
the formation of the standard scientific community as we know
mm.
today.
It is like a rather I don't know. It's a difficult question in this way that there are like a lot of race theories
Yeah,
at that time, you know.
yeah, yeah,
So one thing I don't know, like I've only seen it from Django Unchained, so I don't know how reliable that is from that time. But there is one scene in Django Unchained, right, like
yeah,
where Mr. Candy, I think,
yeah, yeah,
like he takes the skull of that guy and says, like, yeah, like in this part of the skull of a black man, you know,
yeah,
is the brain, and it's like really small, so that's why they can't think that good, you know.
yeah,
So I got like I remember that scene as I read about the skull part, you know, in
yeah,
this book
yeah,
as well. So I was like, okay, you know, maybe he was like just being, I don't know, like stoic about it, but it
yeah,
still felt like, okay, maybe now he will come up with some racist stuff, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
but,
that's also really interesting, right? The themes they talk about, for
mm,
example, and the importance given to the decorum of people and
yes,
even the languages they speak. For example, there were a lot of words like when Mr. Mortimer speaks, the chat bubble reads something different in a
mm,
different way compared to, for example, one of the servant in the stories. So I think a lot of care has been really put into this story, and it really gives you a window into a society that is far into the past, and that's one of the things I really love about this book. And
mm,
there are similar books from the 1800s that I really enjoy because this looks like a completely different time to our time right now.
mm, definitely,
Mm. And yeah, do you think you will read more Sherlock Holmes in the future?
definitely.
Mm.
It was yeah, it was something different, I guess, like from all the existential crisis things, that we've
Mm-hmm.
been reading in the past. Yeah. Like just solving a mystery, like not just solving a mystery, but like solving a mystery felt like
Mm-hmm.
really nice.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, maybe that's also one of the reasons why the German folks here, they like krimis. They are like, it seems like that's the best genre.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there is some explanation, like relation
Mm-hmm.
between this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really recommend to most people to read it. It's personally one of my favorite. Kind of sent me back to my boyhood days when I would really sit on my bed, turn the pages under the sun. So I used to get sun in my bed and then just read the book during the weekends, and it's really interesting time. Yeah, it was so fun. It was a really nice read. After weeks
Mm.
of existential crisis, I think this was, for me, this was the best read so far. I mean,
Yeah.
uh,
For you, it was the favorite book, you say?
yeah, Sherlock Holmes is my favorite series after all.
Okay, 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 okay,
Yeah,
okay. How much would you rate this book in comparison to other books that you have read?
I would say this is probably around 7 out of 10, right?
Okay, okay.
Because I can't exactly tell you which is the best book right now because I don't
Okay.
remember it by heart.
Mm.
But I know that there are some books that just stick you to the pages.
The
And
Stranger, right? I think that was the best book that you said.
no, no, no. I mean, you mean among the
Yeah,
ones where
it's books that
what
you have
I
been
was
reading.
telling you about is among the other Sherlock Holmes books and the
Ah,
other
okay.
stories. Among the other Sherlock Holmes books and stories, I would say this one is around
Mm,
7 and 8.
mm, mm,
But there are stories that are really captivating, and Sherlock
mm,
Holmes is such a character that throughout, if you read volumes, and he's a really human character, unlike probably other books where
mm,
he fails some of the cases he undertakes. There's some cases which happen where he's completely wrong, right? And there are other
mm,
cases where he's not able to save the client, and the client has to pay the prices for
mm,
his negligence, right? And
mm.
he's kind of an imperfect character who's very
Yeah.
charming in a
Mm,
very unique way. And
mm,
the more you read about him, and the more fascinating it
mm,
becomes.
mm,
So
mm.
among other Sherlock Holmes book, I would say this is around 7. I think
Okay.
this is probably the best for me so far that we have read because
Mm,
uh, for me, how stories work is I either like them or I don't like them so much. And I
mm,
remember reading, I always have this feeling is which somebody asks me which is your favorite book, then when I don't say All the Lies We Cannot See, I always say the
mm.
last book that I read. And
Okay.
this reminds me of a line from a book called The Perks of Being a Wallflower, where the narrator says, "This is a very difficult question for me when somebody asks me what is your favorite book because if I liked a book that I read last, then it naturally becomes the favorite book that I read because I just
Mm, mm,
lived an experience of another person.
mm.
So I would say this one is my favorite so far. After this
Okay.
would be The Stranger. The Stranger was really great. It was an
Mm,
amazing book.
mm, mm, mm.
Maybe we should do like a tier list or something like that. Rank all those that we have read so far. We should do that
Yeah.
at the end of the year when we have finished all 54 books.
Mm, mm,
Would
mm,
be like a 2 or 3 hours episode. We should go live on
mm,
YouTube and
mm.
then just rank them.
Yeah, let's do it. That
Okay.
sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
One last question, like, which with which character do you think you yourself can relate more?
I would say, I mean, there's a reason why Dr. Watson is the narrator is because most people can relate to him most, right? If
Mm,
I was in Dr. Watson's shoes, then I would probably be something. I would also react like how he would do. But
mm,
I would always want to relate with Sherlock Holmes.
okay.
uh, I would say if I could choose to be a character there, whose point of view I want to see would be Sherlock Holmes.
Mm,
And the reason is that unlike Dr. Watson, I'm not a very I would say brave person who would just go inside the moor and then
mm,
face the challenges that he faces. Right?
mm,
I would
mm,
probably be someone who prefer to sit in the chair and then try to figure out stuffs on facts that is provided, and it will be something that is more pleasurable to me than to
mm,
put my foot on the floor and then figure it out on my own. So because we get the point of view of Dr. Watson, I would probably be more Dr. Watson, and Sherlock Holmes is special for me that I would
mm,
not be able to emulate him, but the
mm,
way I think is something that is more akin to Sherlock Holmes than Dr. Watson. But I'm not trying to say that I think like Sherlock Holmes, it's just I try
mm,
to think like him, even though I
mm,
fail
mm,
multiple times.
mm, mm.
What about you?
Oh, I think like hmm, I'm a bit of both. I think
Mm,
I'm sometimes eccentric and sometimes I don't know, like unreasonable, weird, I guess. but sometimes,
mm,
but sometimes I'm actually like reasonable and rational. So it's kind of the both. But if you give me the choice to
mm,
be one of these characters, I think I would choose Dr. Watson because I it seems like even to Dr. Watson himself, Sherlock Holmes doesn't say a lot of stuff, right?
mm, mm.
So for Dr. Watson, it also kind of feels like solving a puzzle,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I think like that's a better part than knowing it from the beginning. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
uh,
If I don't remember it correctly, I think there is one story where the story is written from the point of view of Sherlock Holmes,
okay.
and yeah, there he explains why he thinks this is happening and this is happening and this is happening and not this is happening, and it's a
Mm,
very, I would say, very long story. But I don't remember if that was something that I read or maybe that's something I watched in the TV, because Sherlock Holmes have been adapted multiple times, and they also
mm,
have like a
mm,
modern time adaptation of Sherlock Holmes. Is the
mm,
very good, it's one that I really like, the TV series called Sherlock with
mm.
Benedict Cumberbatch, and then
Ah,
yeah,
right. That's okay. 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 Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I've seen. I've actually like searched it in YouTube. The Hound of Baskerville, and I think I've also seen him. Right.
I don't know if there's Hound of Baskerville in YouTube, but there's one where the
Yeah.
stories from the Victorian times adapted to modern times. So Sherlock Holmes looks at the mobile phone and try to make deductions out of them.
Mm, mm,
And that is one that I really enjoy. There's only
mm,
one thing that I don't like about it is the character of Sherlock Holmes in that particular TV series is different to the character Sherlock Holmes in the books, because the
mm,
character in Sherlock Holmes in the books is more like he's a very charming fellow, right?
mm, mm,
He can
mm,
really find his way around people when he
mm,
wants to, right? It's more
mm,
a choice of his mannerism is very energetic, and then he's very charming, but only when he wants to. Only when
mm,
he's interacting with other people, and he's not always weird. Not always weird. He's weird only in his uh, uh, presence by himself.
mm,
Whereas in the TV series, it's shown as Sherlock to be like completely weird, this weird guy. Everybody says he's a weirdo, but that would not be the
mm,
case. Everybody will respect Sherlock Holmes in the books, and
mm, mm,
I think you also kind of got a hint when he's really revered by every character. Every character
mm,
knows him, and
mm.
uh, so. But I really think the adaptation is quite good.
It was nothing personal, man. Come on, like I didn't mean that as a bad thing.
What was the bad thing?
No, no, no. I was joking. Like, no, it seems like because I said like Sherlock Holmes is weird, like I was trying to explain, like, no, man, he's not weird, like in
Oh,
the book.
you would believe me, but when I still had Facebook, there was a video that shared like Sherlock about the Sherlock Holmes, and then the character Sherlock about this
Mm,
modern Sherlock TV series from this modern TV series, and I wrote this big passage that I just told
mm,
you as a
mm,
comment section, comparing the Sherlock character in the books with the Sherlock characters in the TV series.
mm,
Because I was really pissed off. Some character would say, "Yeah, this guy is weird." Because if you have read the book, then you would know that
yeah,
he's weird, because we see the point of view of Dr. Watson, and he
yeah,
explains that he's weird in Dr. Watson's presence, and that is how we do, right? When I'm in your
yeah,
presence, I'm also weird, but I'm not necessarily weird in front of strangers. So
mm, mm,
uh,
mm, mm.
there's something
No,
that
no,
I
no. No, no, like no, but then again, I mean, like weird is also really not that of a negative thing, right?
No,
Like
no, no. Of course not.
most of the protagonists that we have read so far from all these books, they were weird in some way, right? They're
Yeah.
not normal,
No.
right? So I
Yeah.
think that's what makes them special, right? So
No, I mean, my only complaint was that not
mm,
because he was weird. My only
mm,
complaint was that the portrayal was not truthful to the written work.
no,
I
mm, mm,
accept, for
mm,
example, all the premises had to be adjusted and all the signs had to be considered
mm,
right while writing for the
mm,
modern day. But I felt they could stay honest to the character that is Sherlock, and
mm,
that's not what they did. And I think this is also the case with other movies. I think they also have a movie with Robert Downey Jr., which
mm,
is also kind of probably for cinema. They've tried to make it
mm,
very flashy, but doesn't work with Sherlock because he's a very brainy kind of guy, and
mm,
uh, it's already interesting when he speaks, when he explains it, and he doesn't necessarily need to, come up with special sound effects, special
no,
characteristics to make him an interesting character.
yeah,
So that's it for this week. I would say last week. That
mm,
is Sherlock Holmes, Hounds of Baskerville by Sir Arthur
mm,
Conan Doyle.
mm.
Now for next week or this week, what have we planned? This is your turn to recommend.
It's called Heart of Darkness
Okay,
by Joseph Conrad.
Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Okay,
Mm.
okay,
That was a book recommended by a friend of mine, and I don't know what it is about. I've actually already started reading it, like for 50 pages or so,
okay,
but I can guess like what it is about, but yeah. Um,
okay. Please don't spoil anything. We will do the spoiler thing on Sunday when we reach to Anup's spoiler moment.
okay.
So that's it for this week. That was Hound of Baskerville by Sherlock Holmes that we discussed about, and for next week we will be preparing Heart of Darkness by uh, Joseph Conrad.
Mm.
And everybody who wants to read along with us, please. The next book for this week is Heart of Darkness. Thank you very much, Anup, yet again, and we speak
Thank
again
you.
next week.
Bye bye.
Bye.